Committee will come to order. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Director Ray. Before I get into the primary topic of my remarks, I want to ask you about a separate issue. On June 16th, my esteemed colleague, Ranking Member Raskin of the Oversight Committee, sent you a letter asking the FBI to publicly reiterate certain non-classified information that it provided in an oral briefing about Form FD 1023, subpoenaed by Oversight Chairman Comer. It has now been almost a month since Mr. Raskin sent his letter. When can he expect a response?
I'll have to check with my staff because we've gotten so many letters from so many members, and that's each one of them is important to me. But as I sit here right now, I don't know when the timing is, but we'll get back to you on that. Okay. And more importantly, we'll get back to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and we will follow up. Okay. Especially because I did ask directly of your staff, so we'll follow up. And now, St. Louis and I are here today in continuing solidarity with the protesters, the advocates, and movements that are actually targeted by surveillance and other law enforcement abuses in this country. Director Ray, I know that you are aware of the FBI's long and sordid history of targeting Black protesters and activists. At a hearing before this committee in December of 2017, you characterized the abuses related to COINTELPRO as, quote, one of the darker moments in the FBI's history. It's something we're not proud of, but it is also something we've learned from, end quote. But Director Ray, isn't it true that an FBI agent improperly ran a batch query of unminimized FISA information using the identifiers of 133 individuals arrested in connection with the protests after the murder of George Floyd in 2020? Just a yes or no is fine.
Well, I'm aware of the instance you're talking about. Whether or not that correctly describes it or not, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's in the most recent FISC opinion, but what I will tell you is that incident is non-compliance. I consider it unacceptable, and most importantly, it predates all of these fixes and corrective measures and reforms that we've put in place, which I think would have prevented it from happening now.
Thank you. And now on to Zero Fox. Isn't it true a firm hired on a $14 million contract by the FBI, which we've heard already today, to monitor social media threats, previously labeled Black Lives Matter activists as threat actors requiring constant surveillance? Yes or no?
I'm not sure that's a correct description of the way we do work with Zero Fox, but I don't know that that's a correct description of how we do it.
So did the FBI hire the firm?
My understanding of Zero Fox is it has a tool which allows us to in certain instances, engage in social media searches to prevent threats.
So the FBI, so they weren't hired.
I don't know. Again, the terms of our arrangement, like whether it's a retention or what. But I've heard the term Zero Fox before. Mm-hmm. And my general experience is it's usually used in connection with preventing violence at a particular critical incident of some sort.
So to the tune of $14 million, though, there is reporting that threat actors was actually what they label Black Lives Matter activists, two of whom I know very well, and I served more than 400 days on the ground during the Ferguson uprising myself, more than 400 days, many of those days with those two people that were named and who are not violent. Isn't it true that the FBI has been actively involved in the law enforcement response to people protesting the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, a response that has included state charges of domestic terrorism against protesters? Yes or no?
Well, our Atlanta division is working in support of our state and local partners when it comes to violence and threats of violence that occur amid the unrest that you're referring to.
So the FBI is involved. These are not isolated incidents, and as I said, they're part of a long history of abuses by the FBI against Black and brown communities and progressive movements. These are the real oversight issues. They matter to my district, where there is real and justified skepticism of whether the civil rights of Black and brown people are adequately protected. I know this from personal experience in the Ferguson uprising and from other protest movements that I have been a part of. That's why I asked you about the targeting of protesters the last time that you were before us, because it also included me. But what my district is not concerned about is the Republican conspiracy theories and selective targeting of law enforcement agencies who try to hold their twice impeached, twice indicted cult leader Donald Trump accountable. The Insurrection Caucus wants to use this hearing to score immediate political points. They want to invade oversight. They don't want to conduct it. But we're talking about real issues, real reform that could actually save lives. So once again, I urge my Republican colleagues who claim to care about government overreach and weaponization to do the exact same. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just remind the lady that what we'd actually like to do is work with you to protect Americans' privacy, whether they've been targeted on the right or on the left.
Point of order. Point of order. Point of order.
Gentleman may state his point of order.
It's not your time.
I appreciate the point of order, and I was just getting ready to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate that.
I appreciate the reminder.
I want to follow up, Director Ray, about the Foreign Influence Task Force. So there have been exchanges with Mr. Johnson from Louisiana, Ms. Hageman over that, and I understand the difference. I want to respect the differences in characterization. Earlier this week, in denying a stay of its order, the federal court essentially said this isn't complicated. Follow the law as articulated by the United States Supreme Court in the area of the First Amendment, and that was it as far as it was concerned. The Foreign Influence Task Force is not a predecessor's decision. You set that up, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you've known about the continuous interaction with social media companies. You've known about, I'm sure you know about the testimony of Agent Elvis Chan, correct?
I mean, I don't know everything he's testified to, but I'm aware that he was.
Did you read his testimony?
I've read parts of it, yes.
Okay. And there were thousands of posts that were flagged to the social media companies. These meetings with social media continued across time on a periodic basis. And this court has found, and I understand where the point of disagreement is, I guess, at this stage is, but I believe it's fairly common sense, that if you've got a constant, expectant suggestions from the FBI to social media companies with respect to social media posts, at some point in time it becomes a government decision or it becomes coercive in nature. That's what the court's preliminarily found. That apparently is the line you decided to walk in setting this up. Today, it's sort of striking that you come in and you sort of casually acknowledge that among other things that we did pass through, I think you said, information from the Ukrainian SBU to social media, as if it's normal for the FBI to serve effectively as the agent of a foreign power, to help pull information out of circulation to which Americans otherwise would have access because the Foreign Intel Service doesn't like it. Now, those are my characterizations. I have tried to be a little bit more neutral in my language, and you can differ with them, but here's what I'm wondering. Why would you walk that fine a line with respect to Americans' fundamental constitutional rights at scale, especially with knowledge of past abuses by the FBI like COINTELPRO? You said earlier that the FBI wasn't even concerned about disinformation per se, but the foreign origins of the information. Assuming so, how does that comport with Lamont versus Postmaster General?
Well, I'm not going to try to engage on Supreme Court jurisprudence, but what I can tell you is that the
well, I mean that's the point, though, Director Ray. And let me just ask you: do you know about that case? Do you know that case?
I've heard of the case.
All right, right in the heart of the Cold War, at the behest of an American plaintiff, a communist, by the way, Supreme Court said that Americans have a First Amendment right of access to information, even if it is propaganda originating abroad. And in that case, the United States Postal Service could not interdict it. Do you know that, in essence?
Again, I'm not familiar with the holding of the case. I'd have to review it to be sure that that's correct.
That seems to me the trouble. I keep wondering as I read all these revelations how that could be. Or then, let me go to this. You know that the FBI engaged with the social media companies, continuously warning them of hack and leak operations in 2020. not 2018, by the way, but before the 2020 election. Lots of warnings about hack and leak. You're aware of that?
I'm aware that we gave them lots of information about intelligence that we were receiving from some of our intelligence.
At the time you were giving them those warnings, the FBI had had the Hunter Biden laptop for more than 9 months. And, but of course, COINTELPRO itself was the mother of all hack and leak operations. Active leftist activists at the time broke into the FBI's headquarters office in Media, Pennsylvania, stole the files, gave them to the media, and newspapers published them. And you're bound to be aware of New York Times Company versus United States, the Pentagon Papers case.
Yes.
And that says that even if information has been stolen or inappropriately taken, that you can't get a prior restraint in almost any circumstance to prevent their being distributed. So how is it that your Foreign Influence Task Force is out warning of hack and leak operations to innocent, not involved in the hack? That would be criminal, but news or social media organizations where information may be circulated.
Well, first off, we're not engaging in any prior restraint. Second,
wow.
Second, well, let me, if I could finish, please. Second, there's no serious dispute that foreign adversaries have and continue to attempt to interfere in our elections, and that they use social media to do it. President Trump himself in 2018 declared a national emergency to that very effect. And the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan, overwhelmingly bipartisan way, by the way, not only found the same thing, but called for more information sharing between us and the social media.
I hear you, but it doesn't justify trampling the established First Amendment rights of Americans as the Supreme Court has declared them. Whether or not, frankly, I agree with them or you agree with them. And I just don't, that's what I don't get. You come here and the comments are sort of blasé answers. Accountability is always down the road. We never arrives. And I'm not trying, I guess I'm joining the gang up. But what I'm concerned about, and I think Americans are concerned about, is they just never see it. I don't know of an answer other than to take an appropriation from you that's very significant, or to do something to take your intel powers away and put them in another agency. I honestly want to know.
Mr. Chairman.
And I think Americans want to know. I yield.
We sure do. The gentleman from Maryland who keeps us on time is recognized.
Until it's my turn, then I'm going to run over to.
Wait till it gets into this 5 minutes. Yeah.
Gentleman's time is about ready to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate you coming in today. I saw a characterization of this hearing as a GOP FBI grudge match, but I must say that the only grudge that's been seen here is from the Republican side. I think you've done an outstanding job with your testimony today, even when you've been, admitting that there are shortcomings by your office, that mistakes have been made. I appreciate the fact that you are willing to do that, because it's not easy for agency heads to do that, and also, more importantly, to point out the changes that you've made to try and address those concerns. I want to say this too. There's a couple points that have been made here about, you were just talking about the Foreign Influence Task Force, and I know there's a lot of talk about this as being some kind of prior restraint or First Amendment violation, but I want to say that I'm on the side that thinks this is a very important tool for the FBI and the United States government to have, especially with respect to potential intervention or interference, especially by Russian state actors with respect to American elections. There's some people who think, and I'm kind of starting to agree, that one of the reasons some of my colleagues are pushing so hard against this and other aspects of information protection within the United States is because they want to have Russian interference in the 2024 election.
Oh, please.
I certainly don't. So I certainly thank you for continuing your efforts on that front. There was an issue that was raised about whistleblowers earlier in the hearing, and I wanted to bring this up. I know you can't speak to this, Mr. Director, but these are two checks that were written to some of these witnesses, two of the witnesses that testified here, and they are for over $250,000. Now, they came after they gave their testimony, I think by a few days, but from my perspective, this is something that the American public should know when they evaluate the testimony of these individuals. And hopefully I don't know if the majority knew about this but didn't disclose it at the time or what was going on with it, but in my book, this really brings the credibility of these witnesses' testimony into question. And I think we should keep this in mind when we evaluate the allegations that they've made. I also want to say this too. My Republican colleagues have come a long ways from the law and order days of the Republican Party back when I was a kid. Now we're at defund the FBI. I think one of them selling T-shirts to try and raise money using that slogan. Another colleague is talking about abolish the ATF. Another one wants to say defund the Department of Justice. But as you mentioned in your testimony earlier, the FBI is doing a lot of great work protecting the country from terrorism, foreign intelligence threats, international cartels. There's weapons of mass destruction that you mentioned in your testimony. I appreciate that. And also, there's been a great deal of talk about the domestic terror threats. For me, the planned attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan and apparently kill her was chilling to the extreme, and I appreciate the fact that you all were able to intervene on that. I want to say this quickly too. I'm running short on time, but the misinformation and weaponization claims that have been made by my Republican colleagues, I want to offer these two articles. One is called by Aaron Blake of the Washington Post, All the Ways Trump, Not His Foes, Sought to Weaponize the Government. And then another one, this is Philip Bump. This is on the Missouri v. Biden case, which was quoted extensively at the beginning of the hearing, a deeply ironic reinforcement of right-wing information. The point of this article is that the Missouri v. Biden decision, which, and I know you can't comment on it because it's pending litigation, but I also think it's being challenged by the Department of Justice, and rightly so, because it's riddled with factual inaccuracies and legal inaccuracies as well. One other article for the record, this is by Lee Littman and Lawrence Tribe. Restricting the government for speaking to tech will spread disinformation and harm democracy. I'd like all of those admitted. And then lastly, with respect to the Hunter Biden issue, there's a letter from Abby Lowell, who represents Mr. Biden. This is to Representative Jason Smith, but I think also to Chairman Jordan as well, that raises the pushback on the allegations. That points out that the investigation began during the Republican Trump administration, was supervised by 2 Republican attorneys general, was carried over by a holdover Republican U.S. attorney. Last point I want to make, I promise I won't run over my time much. I happen to represent the district where we contain 2 of the sites where the FBI headquarters could be moved to. The chairman made a reference to maybe not wanting to fund the move, but I must say, I think I had an office near your building. They've got nets around it to keep parts of the building from falling down and hurting pedestrians. The move is important and also would give you a chance to consolidate. Hopefully you'll bring it to Prince George's County. We'll save $1 billion for the taxpayers. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, FBI's mission is to protect the American people and uphold the U.S. Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a couple years ago, it was a hearing, and I actually, looking on all of the concerns that I've seen was really warrantless surveillance and abuses of Section 702 of FISA. I compare your agency to KGB. And spending 2 years in this committee, reading a lot of reports now, doing a lot of hearings, I am really shocked that your agency is involved not just unlawful surveillance of American citizens, intimidation of American citizens, censorship of American citizens, potential cover-ups of convenient political figures, and potential setups of inconvenient political figures. And a lot of my colleagues asked a lot of questions, but I think when we look at that, and unfortunately we haven't been doing our job authorizing spending, which was not authorized by our committee already for over a decade, we're going to have this serious conversation and including reauthorization of Section 702. But I want to talk about, follow up on some other issues that you mentioned about that my colleagues I was talking about, and you mentioned that you focus on malign foreign actors. So in Durham report, which describes 2020, he states, and this is a quote, "Steele subsources could have been compromised by the Russians. FBI never gave appropriate consideration to the possibility that the Steele reports was Russian disinformation. No vetting happened. You have some falsified FISA court application. You have some very shady, confidential human sources that you kept paying for them. Nothing was vetted. Some of your head of counterintelligence division was accused of taking money from Russian oligarchs just recently this year. So you said it all was bad. Now we go to 2022. Your agency is involved with SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, to actually provide information to big tech to censor just views of American people. No vetting seems as happening. This is information. Actually, a lot of this information was pro-Russian against Ukraine and pro-Putin. Your agents just pass it along. It seems like nothing happened. And it's interesting for me that, when I raised some issue, actually, beginning of July, and what's happening in Ukraine, I don't have any confidential human sources, just using common sense and intelligence that something is wrong happening in Ukraine. It seems like there is a lot of infiltration. I was attacked. Oh my gosh, how can you question? Well, strangely enough, after me raising this question in the middle of July, President Zelensky fired his SBU top guy, opens over 600 investigations, is potentially, infiltration by Russians, and then fire a lot of other people for corruption, and anti-corruption prosecutor was suddenly installed. But what is really interesting for me, how could you have these processes, and are you doing actually any investigation to look? Because it seems to me, as I understand, you still have our agencies working with SBU, with, coming from KGB time, and FSB time has a lot of potential to have this infiltration. Are you doing any investigations on these issues?
Doing investigations on...
Yeah, to look at that, why we're doing unvetted information we're taking from SBU, which actually was infiltrated and given to censor Americans to our big tech companies. Are you looking into that as an agency?
I'm not sure there's an investigation that is directly on point to what you're saying. I mean, certainly the SBU is an agency that we worked with for a long time.
So did we change the processes now, since we know your guys work with SBU? SBU was infiltrated by Russian, and, big tech was censoring American citizens with this unvetted information that actually was provided by Russians. Do you change any processes? Or is it still happening? You have still the same processes that happened. Is it still happening now?
Well, the engagement that we had with SBU was during the...
But I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Because recently, some of your agents had actually a joint meeting, and they were bragging how they're top cooperations with SBU. Did you change processes?
I'm not sure what processes you're talking about.
To vet information.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Again, during the period at the beginning of the invasion...
No, I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Do you vet information that you get from agencies like SBU? I mean, I don't know if are we being stupid? I understand. Are we being infiltrated by Russians or corrupt? I don't understand why we not vet information with such a really challenging agency. So are you changing anything of that? I would like to have a briefing or something on this, because if you're not looking at that, I have a huge problem with that.
I'm happy to try to see if we can arrange to get you a better briefing on the subject.
Because this is a serious national security issue. Are you back?